Hare Krishna. So this is the third installment of the Nectar of Devotion portion of the Iskanadisi Bhakti Shastri course. And we're going to be covering chapters 4, 5, and 6 today. Last week we covered the beginnings of sadhana bhakti. It was described that there's three types of bhakti described in the Nectar of Devotion: sadhana bhakti, devotional service and practice; bhava bhakti, devotional service and ecstasy; and prema bhakti, devotional service in pure love of God. And it talked a little bit about what sadhana is. It's engaging your senses in the service of Krishna. The idea, it said, is to reawaken the dormant devotion that you have for Krishna, and the whole purpose of it. There's a primary overriding principle, which is to remember Krishna and never forget him. So all the items in sadhana bhakti are subservient to that principle. We're trying to keep remembering Krishna and not forgetting him. It's our forgetfulness of Krishna that's the cause of our downfall. And so it mentioned that when we engage our various senses, includes the mind, in the service of Krishna, of course that will help us to remember him, and it will awaken the devotion that's dormant already within us. Devotional service is not something that we actually learn extraneously, but it's something that already lies within us, and the practice of devotional service is meant to awaken that. It's not just a matter of doing the right things. That's important, but that the performance of devotion is supposed to be reawakening that natural devotion that lies within. And if it's not doing that, something is wrong. Today we're going to be talking about, also it talked about different levels we talked last week about the different levels of qualification for performing sadhana bhakti, and how that really related a whole lot to our faith and our understanding. Those are related terms. That the more we had understanding of things, we could have a greater faith and confidence, and couldn't be shaken from our path. So I mentioned that the Kanishtas, the neophytes, had a very weak faith, and they could be diverted from the path more easily. Where the Madhyamas, they had a faith, but maybe they couldn't always succeed in argumentation. They sometimes might be defeated by somebody with greater scriptural knowledge in argumentation, but their faith was always strong. And Uttamadhikari had such a deep knowledge of the scriptures that they could always substantiate the appropriateness of bhakti, and their faith was completely also unshakable. Today we're going to, and also then we talked about things that are inhibitions on our practice of bhakti, things that cause us to fail to advance. And the two categories that Rupa Goswami gave, he compared it poetically to being either possessed by evil spirits or by witches. Sometimes it's called pisachis. There's these two witches or evil spirits, depending on your translation, that cause us trouble on the path of devotional service. And he categorizes those two as bhukti, the desire for material pleasure and enjoyment, and mukti, the desire for liberation. And he gave evidences last week how devotional service is much better than both of those, so we should not desire them. And here in the first chapter, we're going to talk about. He's going to give much more evidences of that. That even though, because what happens, we mentioned last week that Srila Prabhupada categorized the four pious persons who take to devotional service. That's given in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. The one who's distressed, the one who's in need of something, the one who's inquisitive, and the one who has knowledge. Those he characterizes in Bhagavad Gita as being mixed bhaktas, not pure devotees, not practicing uttama bhakti as being described in the Nectar of Devotion. But he lumps them together. He calls them kanishtas. And we understood that he did that because there really is a technical difference there. Somebody who's a pure bhakta, practicing Uttama Bhakti, doesn't practice devotional service in order to get either of those two things, bhukti or mukti. That means that because that doesn't there's an ulterior motive, an anya balashita. An anya balashita, this is a pure devotion or Uttama Bhakti is anya balashita shunyam, free from any ulterior motive. And so these people, these four, have an ulterior motive, or in some cases, some acharyas will classify it. Prabhupada also seemed to classify it here in Nectar of Devotion as the Gyanis are a little bit higher than that. They generally fail the second test of pure devotion, the second line of the definition, where they're attached to either jnana or yoga. So their bhakti is a little covered by those things. They're not simply relying upon Krishna's mercy. And so there's a technical difference between them and even beginning pure devotees or Uttama Bhaktas. But I think if you look at them more generally, you'll see that they resemble each other closely enough. They both need one thing, that they need association of more advanced devotees in order to progress. So somebody who meets an Uttama Bhakta who's in that category, the four pious people, they can easily get the faith that they need to realize that service to Krishna is an end in itself, not a means to an end. And those persons who have that bit of pure faith but aren't very advanced, says also they can be thrown off the path. So they're not a whole lot different from each other in that sense. There's a kind of a technical difference, and so what we see is that somebody who's a genuine kanishta, who's a neophyte in Uttama Bhakti, they may not be performing devotional service for some ulterior motive, but they still have attachments to these things, bhukti and mukti. We can find that in ourselves, that we may understand and have faith that devotional service to Krishna is sufficient for everything, and that we shouldn't worship Krishna for some extraneous purpose, but service to Krishna is an end in itself. But still we have attachments. So the other person, the four pious people, they have attachments to those things, plus they want to worship Krishna for that. You see? But so that's the technical difference. So in any case, even if we are practicing Uttama Bhakti, we are still haunted by these ghosts or witches, bhukti and mukti, even though we may not be performing our devotional services to get those things. We still have attachments to those things. And so the chapter today, at the end of the last chapter, in chapter 3, there was evidence how people who are advanced in pure devotion have no care for these things any longer. Here we're going to get a whole chapter 4 that does the same thing. And that should give us some inspiration to realize, to have more faith in pure devotion, and to have less faith in bhukti and mukti. So this is meant to be, this chapter coming up here, chapter 4, is meant to be an inspiration for us to progress on the path. And so here's what advanced devotees, people who are beyond our level, feel about these things. Their attitude has changed. We feel that we're lacking something. We're in chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita, we talked about that kama, that desire. We feel desires. We feel incomplete, and that hurts our devotional service. And so we have all these. So we have all these desires, thinking that will make us more happy, that will make us more complete. And so we desire material things. Otherwise, we want relief from the suffering. And so liberation. Oh, just get me out of this material world. Is there. So we have these things. We have this attachment and aversion. Bhagavad Gita talks so much about that, coming under the control of attachment and aversion. And that slows our progress in bhakti. Mm-hmm. And so that here Rupa Goswami is trying to give us inspiration to help us clear the pathway for those things. And so this is what we're going to have here. Yeah, yeah. So here's chapter 4. It's called Devotional Service Surpasses All Liberation. That's the title of it. And again, and so, this chapter gives many scriptural evidences to demonstrate how persons advanced in bhakti have no attraction to either of these things, bhukti or mukti, liberation or desires for material enjoyment. And I've just summarized some of the verses here. Rupa Goswami quotes all of these different verses from various scriptures. There's a quote from Prithu Maharaj that demonstrates how hearing and chanting the Lord's glories are superior to impersonal liberation. He said, if I have to have a liberation where I can't hear and chant about the glories of the Lord, he doesn't want it. All right, so hearing and chanting, this is the first two processes of sadhana bhakti, shravanam, kirtanam. Right? And so we may take them to be just means to advancing in devotional service, beginning processes, but they're eternal processes. The more that we advance in devotional service, the more those things become wonderful. And the attraction for them and the pleasure from them simply increases. And so Prithu Maharaj says, if I can be liberated, be free from all material troubles, but I can't do those things, then I don't want it, he says. So some of the things that we're doing, he's revealing to us the high value of those things. We shouldn't take them for granted. And then there's the example of Bharat Maharaj, who was emperor of the world. He had imperial opulence, and young. He was still young. It wasn't he was aging, and it was time for him to renounce. But he wanted to go to the forest, and he wanted to intently practice his bhakti, and so he just gave it up very easily. So that shows as how we talk about the higher taste, that even in the very beginning of our devotional service, we experience something that's more wonderful than anything else, but we suffer from this competing taste for bhukti and mukti, and we're fighting against that. But when the taste of devotional service becomes stronger, more concentrated, more continuous, it wins out, and the bhukti and mukti lose that battle, and they seem completely insignificant. So Bharat Maharaj is an example of that. He was living a much better life than any of us, and he gave it all up to practice austerities and live simply in the forest. Then there's Vritrasura, and he also said that in comparison with devotion, if he could rule the universe, that's better even than Bharat Maharaj, he was only ruling the planet. Yogic powers, right? Those the mystical powers of yoga, are quite wonderful. You can travel from place to place. You can control people's mind. You can have Prapti Siddhi, get anything you want. So many things are there. And liberation, he says, none of these things are as good as devotion. So he even makes a stronger argument. And then Lord Shiva, he gives something really interesting, because he not only is it bhukti, but he says the devotees don't care if they're in heaven or hell, liberated or not, as long as they have devotion. So not only are they willing to give up enjoyment, but they don't care even if they're suffering. That's how beautiful devotion is to them. So it says heaven or hell, liberated or not. That as long as they can have devotion, they're satisfied. So it's both. So they have no attachment either to sukha, happiness, nor do they have an aversion to dukkha, unhappiness. Just if they can have devotion, everything is sufficient for them. So even if we can think of giving up some of our enjoyments, it is a little frightening to think of having to suffer in the process of our devotional service. So that's even something a little bit more profound. There's a verse where Lord Indra says that devotion is the highest self-interest. Of course, we're going to discover that that's because it produces the highest result, and nothing else does. We're going to find that in the next chapter. That devotional service is necessary if you want to achieve anything substantial, and it's sufficient. It doesn't need anything else. And then again, Prahlad Maharaj says something similar, that chanting the glories of the Supreme Lord and always relishing the nectar of the lotus feet of the Lord is sufficient. One needs nothing else. He gives his testimony. And then it says after Lord Nrsingadev appeared and killed Hiranyakashipu, Indra, Hiranyakashipu had taken over the planets where the demigods were residing and kicked them out. And so by Nrsingadev coming and saving Prahlad, he also was able to restore the Devatas to their rightful position. And Indra made a prayer at that time to Nrsingadev. He said that even though they had been returned to their position in heaven, that the real benediction, and he mentioned also that the Devatas, they get to live in the heavenly planet Swarga, a beautiful place. So there's lots of bhakti there, and they also get to enjoy a portion of the sacrifices that are offered by the human beings, the fire sacrifices that are offered. And usually that's considered to be, a very good deal. People on earth will try to get to the heavenly planets because that sounds like a really good deal. And so people would imagine that the real attraction. That the Devatas, Indra would have been happy to have that returned to him, and that would have been why he was pleased to see Lord Nrsingadev. And instead, he said the real benediction was not that they were being returned to the heavenly planets. It wasn't that they were being given back their portions of the sacrifice, but he had a chance now to place the Lord within his heart. He'd seen the Lord, and so his devotion had a chance to increase. The Devatas the demigods are devotees, and so part of the reason why the Lord has them put into trouble on occasion is to remind them of that fact. And so he was feeling not as much relief about being restored to his position as being restored to his increase in his devotion. His devotion was increased. Gajendra, the king of the elephants, who was fighting the crocodile and losing in the river, and he laments afterwards, after seeing the Lord in person, and he says that the only reason that he asked the Lord for rescue is that he didn't have experience of devotion before that. And so it's similar to Dhruva Maharaj, who first prays for a kingdom, and then when he sees Lord Vishnu, he says, I desired broken glass, and I've obtained a jewel. So Gajendra had the same thing. He actually was mixed. He was wanting something material, relief from the danger he was facing. And the Lord came and saved him. And after he saw the Lord, then he thought that actually devotion was the only valuable thing, and he regretted that he'd asked for rescue instead of devotion. Then there's a verse quoted where Lord Narayan says that the devotees do not aspire for any of the 5 kinds of liberation. There's 5 kinds of liberation. There's becoming one with the Lord, which the devotees would always reject. There's living on the same planet, Salokya, having the same opulence as the Lord, being a close associate of the Lord. There's Sarsti, Samipya, Salokya, Sarsti, Samipya, Salokya. Same opulence as the Lord. Same form as the Lord. Sarupya. Sarupya, the same form as the Lord. Salokya, same planet as the Lord. Sharshti and Samipya, I think, being close to the Lord and having the same opulence as the Lord. Those are in addition to being one with the Lord. Now, those things are not, the last 4 are not necessarily averse to devotion. If you merge with the Lord, you can't serve. So that one's always rejected. The other ones, it's explained, there's different levels of that. That even Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says even mixed devotees can attain some of those kinds of liberation, be on the same planet, have the same form and such. But they will not have an intense desire to serve. And so the devotees, they only want those things if it facilitates their service. See? So even to live on the same planet or have the same form of him, if it isn't increasing their level of service, then they reject it. So they'll accept it if it's, Prabhupada says we should want to go back to Godhead in those things. But they only want to accept it if it's facilitating their service and increasing it rather than maybe even decreasing it. So that's only valuable to them because it facilitates their service. Then the wives of Kaliya, the serpent who was fighting with Krishna, said that the dust of the Lord's feet is better than heaven, better than ruling the universe, better than yogic powers or liberation. They covered the whole gamut of things. They're also very poetic and lovely. And then the personified Vedas. They said that the devotees renounce material comforts in order to associate with the advanced devotees and don't care for liberation because they are hearing and chanting about the Lord's activity. So again, we come back to the wonder of devotion, especially in this hearing and chanting. So it says that that people will go just do as Bharat Maharaj did and leave their comforts and go and accept some discomfort if you go into the forest like he did. You're accepting both things, renouncing comforts and accepting discomforts. But if they have a chance, people will do that to associate with persons who have a greater bhakti, because their attraction to bhakti is stronger than these other things. And then Lord Krishna says to Uddhava, "My dear Uddhava, the devotees who have completely taken shelter of my service are so steadfast in devotional service that they have no other desire, even if they are offered the 4 kinds of spiritual opulences." So Krishna says the same thing. So they have no other only desire for service. That's the only thing that's on their minds. And so if liberation figures into that, that's okay with them. If it increases their service, facilitates their service, there's not a problem with that. But if their service means not being liberated, if their service means having some material difficulties, and if their service means not having material pleasures, they don't consider that to be any obstacle whatsoever. The only valuable thing is devotion. It becomes clearer and clearer in their minds. In lesser devotees like ourselves, people generally want to think how they can have both. I'd like to serve Krishna, that's very nice, but also give me a very pleasant life. Why can't I have both of those things? And the reason why you can't is that those things distract you from your service. If you're attached to them, you're wanting to enjoy them, and then you spend some time enjoying, and you spend some time serving. You want comfort. Many times, the advanced devotees, like Queen Kunti, praised the having trouble, because that made her, and even Indra was indirectly praising the trouble that he faced from Hiranyakashipu, because now he got to see the Lord, and his devotion got to increase. So they don't see anything else that's valuable, and they're quite clear on that. Persons who have advanced in devotional service. And so if we want to make advancement, we have to turn down our optimism for material things and material life, and turn up our optimism in devotion. They really are inversely proportional. The stronger our attachments and our desire to enjoy separately from Krishna, that takes our mind away from Krishna. That causes our devotion to be unsteady. Here it says we're supposed to be remembering him all the time. My spiritual master, he oftentimes likes to say it quite starkly. He says that every act of sense gratification is essentially an act of atheism. We're forgetting Krishna. It causes us to forget Krishna. So it's as if he doesn't exist for that moment. We turn him off for a little while, then we're going to turn him back on again. Fortunately, we'll do that. But they're inversely proportional. And so Rupa Goswami is giving us a whole lot of examples to at least encourage us to move in that direction. We're not missing out if we sacrifice the one for the other. So the advanced devotees all unanimously state that that's the case. we wonder about that. And what will I be if I need to have my comfort, I need to have my security. We think like that. Then in the Dhammadarastakam was quoted there. Well, the author of the Dhammadarastakam says, I do not ask for liberation or any material facility up to the point of liberation. What I want as your favor is that I may always think of your form, in which I see you now as Damodar. So these are the kind of prayers that the advanced devotees do. And then there was also a quote from the Hayashirsha Pancharatra, and it says, I simply pray to be an eternal servant at your lotus feet, nothing else. And then Prabhupada says, this is a quote from the Nectar Devotion. Prabhupada says, there is a well-known verse spoken by Hanuman, in which he says, my dear Lord, if you like, you can give me salvation from this material existence, or the privilege of merging into your existence. God can do that. He can give it to me very easily. But I do not wish any of these things. I do not want anything which diminishes my relationship with you as servant to master, even after liberation. So he's explaining that notion of why they don't want liberation that's not tied to intense devotion. So he says he doesn't want anything that may diminish his relationship with him as master of servant. Even if it's a similar form on the same planet and enjoying the opulence of the Lord. He says if that reduces my devotion in some way, then that's actually he thinks that would be a great misfortune. This relationship of service, it's not like we have here in this world where if somebody is superior and an inferior person has to serve. Only the superior person oftentimes exploits the other person. But the system that Krishna has set up is that he gives us his association, which is something inconceivable. And even though we can't do very much for him, he appreciates it tremendously. And so Krishna is grateful. And so there's a love between the two parties. It's not a one-way street. And that you just can't, there's nothing else that compares to that. That's what Krishna is doing. That's how he's spending his time. He wants the loving relationships with him and his devotees. He can have everything. And he can even make new things. And so he's inviting us to join in that happiness. So there really can't be anything that's better. But we have a great deal of inertia in our lives. So we still are attracted to these things. The bhukti and the mukti. So Rupa Goswami is trying to give us an inoculation against that, an encouragement to proceed further in our Uttama Bhakti, to have more confidence in the fact that simply by pleasing Krishna everything is done. That's Lord Chaitanya defines that as the definition of faith or shraddha. And then there's Maharaj Parikshit says that even liberated persons with full knowledge have to strive to become devotees. So he said that's a higher level thing. Queen Kunti says that great scholars and liberated souls cannot understand Krishna. And then at the end is the Atmarama verse, where it says in this Atmarama verse, it is stated that even those who are completely liberated from material contamination are attracted by the transcendental qualities of Lord Krishna. So there's proof. So somebody even has liberation if they can hear. This is the case of Shukadev Goswami, who was liberated from birth. He heard some of the passages from Srimad Bhagavatam, especially how Krishna was so kind to Putana, and he was attracted. So he was beyond any kind of material attraction. Nothing could attract him materially, any material attachment or aversion. But suddenly he had this overwhelming attraction. And so that shows that devotion, hearing about the Lord, hearing and chanting and the acts of devotion are higher than liberation. So that's chapter 4. And it says that if we review these things and think about them, it should give us more confidence in our path and more confidence in trying to proceed forward. And then chapter 5 is it's called the purity. Prabhupada calls it the purity of devotional service. And the first little section here, really, Prabhupada is talking to us about the previous chapters. He says, all of the previous instructions imparted by Srila Rupa Goswami in his broad statements can be summarized thus. As long as one is materially inclined or desirous of merging into the spiritual effulgence, one cannot enter into the realm of pure devotional service. Meaning that you can't advance. We saw that pure devotional service removes our impurities and gives us the good qualities, our miseries, all the miseries, the kleshagni, removal of all miseries, and the shubhada, the gaining of all auspiciousness and all good qualities. So it's understood that the seed of pure devotional service sprouts in an unclean place. Otherwise, there would be nothing there to clean up. So it's cleaning up, so it means there has to be something there to clean up all this past karma and things like that. So it's cleaning those things up. So it's understood, and where the path of devotion is delineated very clearly, there's this stage after one takes up the regulated practice. One really wants to try to do the whole thing. It's called anishtita sadhana bhakti, where you're unsteady in that service. And that's because of the influence of the desires for bhukti and mukti. That's what's slowing us down. We have this dual attraction, the attraction for the material and the attraction for the spiritual. In further stages, and it's strong enough that it throws off our devotion. So there's a stage of steadiness after that, where the desires may still arise for bhukti and mukti, but they don't disturb your devotion. You understand very fully, no, I simply want to serve Krishna. And then the stage higher than that, where the higher taste becomes concentrated, is called ruchi. And that's described in the fourth shloka of the Shikshastakam. Nadanam najanam nasundarim kavitam vajagadishakama mama janmani janmanishvare bhavatad bhakti rahoitaki twai. I simply want I don't want all these things. Opulences. I don't want followers. I don't want women. I don't want anything that's described in the Vedas as wonderful in the material world. I don't want any of these things. I just want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. So that comes at a higher stage. So at the stage of unsteady devotional service, anishtita sadhana bhakti, we're haunted by the bhukti and mukti, and it's disrupting our devotion. And too much of the time we think that actually it's okay if we just find the right balance, it will be good. So we've been really trying to Rupa Goswami's been trying to really help us to see past that here in these chapters, and Prabhupada reminds us here at the beginning of this one. And so devotional service, the first part is going to focus on the fact that devotional service is so pure that it requires no prerequisites. In every other dharma that you have to have some qualification. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna emphasizes that to Arjuna. You just can't take up somebody else's dharma, because he wants to retire from the battlefield and go beg. He doesn't have the qualification for that. When his emotions calm down, he's not going to be able to sustain that. So you have to have it's usually qualifications of self-control that you have to have. Or sometimes it's realization of the soul that it takes. There's certain qualities that you have to take up any dharma. And you if you don't have those, you won't be able to succeed. But bhakti has no qualifications that we'll see here, and we'll explain why there's no qualification except for existing that allows you to take up bhakti. It's a very strange thing that it's the highest thing. There isn't anything, we've already seen ample evidence of that, but anybody is eligible. Right? If you have universities, highly selective universities are better than the community colleges, right? So we never have a situation where the highest thing isn't selective in some way. If you want to take it, if you want to, whatever you want to do, you want to learn some new skill. If you're a beginner, you take the beginner's course, and it's not until you get to the higher level stuff that things are going to happen. But bhakti is the highest dharma, and everybody is eligible. So this is Prabhupada in one place says it's the mystery of the devotional cult. He says. So Prabhupada says here, next Rupa Goswami states that devotional service is transcendental to all material considerations, and that it is not limited to any particular country, class, society, or circumstance. And he's going to make the point repeatedly, and we can't miss the point here. He says, as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, devotional service is transcendental and has no cause. We'll look at that particular verse that he's referring to here. Devotional service is executed without any hope for gain, and it cannot be checked by any material circumstances. He's referring here to Srimad Bhagavatam 1:2-6. Savai sam puro dharma yato bhaktir dhokshajay ahoita kapati hata yayatma suprasidati. And it's interesting because here he uses it in a way that also Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur does in his Madhurya Kadambini. Most of the time when we read this verse, we say that it's causeless. Ahoitiki, hetu means cause, and it means like it does in English. It means not. So without a cause, and so usually we take it that it's synonymous with not having a motivation. So I perform devotional service just because I want to serve Krishna. I don't have an ulterior motive. And I do it continuously, and that fully satisfies me. In this case, he's taking it as that the service itself, the mercy that you get. We heard already that the Uttama Bhakti comes from the mercy of a devotee, somebody who has it. And in this case, it says that mercy is causeless. That's how. So it can be taken also. The causelessness can refer to the practitioner who doesn't have a motivation, and it can be attributed to the bhakti, which comes to people without good reason, just the mercy of the devotee. So if there were prerequisites for devotion, right, then that would be a cause for the devotion. Yes. If I have to be such and such in order to get it, then then somehow I'm worthy of it. Right? So you can causeless means you can't ever be worthy, and you can't be not worthy. It's just a question, because if you can be worthy, that means you can be not worthy, right? The two are opposites that require each other. And so in this case, it's a fact that nobody really can be worthy because it's so valuable. But you can't ever be worthy either because it's so valuable. Okay.
You can never be worthy.
You can never be worthy. And then Prabhupada goes on, he says, it is open for all, without any distinction, and it is the constitutional occupation of the living entities. And I'll make a comment here that I think maybe it's even more precisely, that's the explanation. That's why it's open for anybody for any distinction, because it's the constitutional occupation for the living entities. We already heard before that devotion is dormant in every being. So that's why there's the qualification, I guess, if you want to have one. But everybody's got it. As long as you're existing, you have devotion dormant within you. That's your qualification. And then it's just simply, and since you can't do anything, the other thing, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his Madhurya Kadambini, just kind of one after another shows that you can't do anything to deserve it. The best you can do, or to make it happen, right? Like if you do all kind of pious activities, the best you can be is one of those four people, the four pious people in the Bhagavad Gita. There's nothing you can do. There's verses that cite that. It only depends upon the mercy of the devotee, which is that's the only way it can come. You can't force it to come. You can't cause it to come. You can only receive it. You can try to put yourself in a better position to get it. That's okay. But it's always something so valuable that it can't be deserved, and it's given freely by the mercy of the devotees. And then Prabhupada says, it is on the basis of his Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's position that anyone can now become a Gaudiya Vaishnava. He talked about the Nityananda Vangshas, the family of Nityananda, who was saying that they had the market cornered on being on practicing bhakti and especially being spiritual teachers. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had Prabhupada says, completely smashed their idea, is how he put it. But so he says, now on the basis of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's position, that anyone can now become a Gaudiya Vaishnava from any part of the world or any part of the universe. So it gets more and more obvious and more broad. Any part of the world or any part of the universe. Then Prabhupada says, our Krishna consciousness movement in the Western world is based on the above-mentioned proposition of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada, our spiritual master. On his authority, we are claiming members from all sections of the Western countries. So it's so pure. So this is bhakti. That's one thing about bhakti. It's so pure that it can even the person with terrible karma. Your birth is related to your karma, but even that person can be cleansed. We have to remember about those first two. We're going to mention that first two qualities of pure devotional service. And then he says, besides that, anyone who is engaged in devotional service is already at the status of being a high-class Brahmana. The so-called Brahmanas claim that one who is not born into a Brahmana family cannot receive the sacred thread and cannot become a high-grade Vaishnava. But we do not accept such a theory because it is not supported by Rupa Goswami nor by the strength of the various scriptures. And he says, Srila Rupa Goswami specifically mentions herein that every man has the birthright to accept devotional service and to become Krishna conscious. He has given many evidences from many scriptures. And he gives some of those. There's one I'll quote here. Well, there's more evidence in the Skanda Purana and the Kashi Kandas portion where it is said, in the country known as Mayuradwaj, the lower caste people who are considered less than Shudras are also initiated in the Vaishnava cult of devotional service. And when they are properly dressed with tilak on their bodies and beads in their hands and on their necks, they appear to be coming from Vaikuntha. In fact, they look so very beautiful that immediately they surpass the ordinary brahmanas. And so I think this is a good time to remember that there were 6 qualities of pure devotion, or Uttama Bhakti, and the first 2 applied to Sadhana Bhakti, we found out last time. And those 2 were the Kleshagni, the removal of all the levels of past karma. There was mentioned even how even the dog eaters could perform fire sacrifices if they chanted the holy name. And so it said so the different statuses of birth and qualifications and qualities, personal qualities, come from your past karma. And devotional service is so powerful that it uproots all of that. What we're suffering from now, everything that's coming down the pipe from the future, would otherwise happen in the future. And even it mentioned how our sinful activities not only cause certain punishments to happen to you, certain bad things to happen, but it also fuels your appetite for sinful activity. And so this also, devotional service wipes even that out. It changes one's whole personality as it grows. And all the good qualities and auspiciousness develop in that person. So a complete transformation. Generally, people are thinking that you have to move up the ladder slowly in the Varnashram system. And then you'll be born, when you're fully purified enough, you can be born as a Brahmin. The notion of making somebody from a lower class into Brahmins seems to be a complete heresy to people like that, who don't understand the power of bhakti, the power of Uttama Bhakti. So the same kind of transformation that may take many, many lifetimes otherwise can happen very, very quickly through the power of Uttama Bhakti. That's how it works. And it's so powerful that even if someone is in quite a degraded state, it works on them.
Kleshagni, and what is the other quality?
Kleshagni is removal of all miseries, and Shubhada, the beginning of all auspiciousness. So we have examples. There is that Mrigari, the hunter, who was saved by Narad Muni. So Prabhupada says, thus a Vaishnava automatically becomes a Brahmin. This idea is also supported by Sanatan Goswami in his book Hari Bhakti Vilas, which is the Vaishnava Guide. Therein he has clearly stated that any person who is properly initiated into the Vaishnava cult certainly becomes a Brahmana, as much as the metal known as Kansa, bell metal, is turned into gold by the mixture of mercury. This was the alchemist's dream. A bona fide spiritual master under the guidance of authorities can turn anyone to the Vaishnava cult so that naturally they may come to the topmost position of a Brahmana. So that's the purity of devotional service, that it has that kind of power. And so it can, even though it's the highest thing, it can take root any place. No preconditions for it except the mercy. In other words, simply becoming initiated does not elevate one. The Prabhupada says, he mentions something else, so he says, not just the act of initiation. He says, in other words, simply becoming initiated does not elevate one to the position of a high-class Brahmana. One also has to discharge the duties and follow the regulative principles very rigidly. So it's not just the initiation process, but it's the sadhana bhakti that comes after it. Because it sounded above, like you become initiated and it just happens, but they're initiated into the practice. Yeah. So it's a nice little warning for us before we get to look. We're always looking for loopholes, how I can get what I don't deserve. And then it's also so pure that it's necessary and sufficient. Is the way I've tried to break this up. That you. We'll see how it plays out here. It says, one who gives up their duties in the varnashram system to take up devotional service, they do not lose anything, while those who follow such duties faithfully without devotion get nothing substantial. Okay. Okay. So there's all the other dharmas. And it says if people do those things, and especially within the varnashram system, which people are thinking is going to give them a good result, even this is if somebody gives up all those things and takes up devotion, they don't lose anything. And somebody who does those things without taking devotion doesn't get anything substantial. Okay, so it's necessary. If you want something substantial, devotion is necessary, and it's sufficient. It doesn't require anything else. So it doesn't require you to do any of these other types of dharmas. And then there's the verse that the Rupa Goswami and Prabhupada quotes from the Bhagavatam, 11:11:32. He perfectly understands that the ordinary religious duties prescribed by me in various Vedic scriptures possess favorable qualities that purify the performer. The other dharmas are given by Krishna also. And he knows that neglect of such duties constitutes a discrepancy in one's life. This is someone who's not devotional. Okay, so there's the regular Vedic dharmas they're beneficial, and if you don't do them, it's harmful. Right? The non-performance of them causes sinful reactions. There's sins of commission and sins of omission, so you say. But it says, having taken complete shelter at my lotus feet, however, a saintly person ultimately renounces such ordinary religious duties and worships me alone. He is thus considered to be the best among all living entities. So again, it's showing that. And then this other verse is quoted, not directly, it's quoted, but there's been kind of a brief description of it was given in Nectar of Devotion, but I thought just the actual verse itself was very clearly explains everything. This is 11.5.41, Bhagavatam. And it's a verse that Prabhupada quotes a lot from. O king, one who has given up all material duties and has taken full shelter of the lotus feet of Mukunda, who offers shelter to all, is not indebted to the demigods, great sages, ordinary living beings, relatives, friends, mankind, or even one's forefathers who have passed away. Since all such classes of living entities are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, one who has surrendered to the Lord's service has no need to serve such persons separately. So this is under ordinary circumstances. We don't exist in a vacuum. We couldn't get here if our parents didn't have us. The Devatas supply us with all of our needs. The sages give us wisdom. We can't usually exist by ourselves. We exist in a society. So we're born with all these debts. Prabhupada explains this also in the text. But because Krishna is the source of all of these things and sustains all of those things, if by serving Krishna we are simultaneously helping all of them, we're paying all those debts simultaneously, and so we're no longer debtors. And so if there's the other rituals that we may have to perform to show our gratitude for all these other things, if they take away from our devotion, then we don't need to do them. We're simply doing our devotion intensely. It will cover all the bases. So again, it's sufficient. Devotion itself is sufficient. It's necessary, and here it's sufficient. And then Prabhupada, it's interesting how I just quoted this whole little short paragraph because this is Prabhupada's take on the famous verse in Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharmam Palityaja, Mamikam Sharam Vaja, just surrender unto me. And here he gives an explanation. It's interesting, throughout Prabhupada's books you'll see ways he uses these various verses and kind of gives you an expanded purport. Here Prabhupada says, in Bhagavad Gita also, the Lord says, give up all your occupations and just become surrendered unto me. I give you assurance that I shall give you protection from all sinful reactions. And then Prabhupada comments, he says, one may think that because he is surrendering unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he will not be able to perform all of his other obligations. But the Lord says repeatedly, don't hesitate. Don't consider that because you are giving up all other engagements, there will be some flaw in your life. Don't think like that. I will give you all protection. Prabhupada says, that is the assurance of Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. I thought that was a beautiful passage. Don't hesitate. Don't consider that because you are giving up all other engagements, there will be some flaw in your life. Don't think like that. I will give you all protection.
Oh, giving up other things, don't hesitate.
Don't hesitate. Yeah, he says, but the Lord says repeatedly, don't hesitate. I will give you all protection. So you have to remember that bhakti is actually entering into activating the relationship we have with Krishna. He mentioned that so many times in Bhagavad Gita, how he helps us on the path. He gives us the intelligence by which we can come to him. He enters the heart with the flaming lamp of knowledge to dispel ignorance. He carries to us what we lack and preserves what we have. And that's not just materially, but Prabhupada gives, in that particular commentary on that verse, Prabhupada gives us very esoteric understanding of that, which is gorgeous. He says that what we lack, of course, is Krishna. And so he says he carries to us what we lack. Krishna brings us to him. And to preserving what we have means that once he takes us there, he doesn't let us go. He keeps us with him. Oh, that was amazing. So we can have confidence in the path of devotion because Krishna he's there. He's actively involved in that process. We've got his attention, and his already existing concern for us and love for us is able to become manifest. And then another thing, another difference between bhakti and everything else is other paths. If you make a mistake, you do something sinful. You have to do something to try to atone for that. It can be a really, really devastating thing. Here it says, if someone falls down from the principles of devotional service, he need not take to the prayaschitta performances for reformation. He simply has to execute the rules and regulations for discharging devotional service, and this is sufficient for his reinstatement. There's a place there where Prabhupada says that the devotees do not fall down, but if by chance they do, it happens like this. And we already heard in the very first early class how devotional service persists from lifetime to lifetime. So there's no, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, there's no loss or diminution. So even if you seem to fall away, that progress is eternal. And there's nothing you have to do if you do fall down except take up the service. There's nothing else that can purify you for that. Devotional service is the most purifying thing. So you don't have to do something separate to say, now I can be qualified again.
Like
you simply...
someone falls down, they just need to continue again.
Yeah, that's what it says. You don't need a prayaschita. And then there's this quote from the Bhagavatam that explains it kind of in detail, and also again shows Krishna's active involvement in bhakti. It's a two-sided situation here. We're trying to serve Krishna, and Krishna is trying to help us. Similarly, in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th chapter, verse 42, Karabhajan Muni addresses King Nimi and says, "My dear king, a person who has given up the worship of the demigods and has completely concentrated his energy in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of God," that's an important passage, has completely concentrated his energy in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has become very, very dear to the Lord. As such, if by chance or mistake he does something which is forbidden, there is no need for him to perform any purificatory ceremonies. This is a prayaschita. Because the Lord is situated within his heart, he takes compassion for the devotee's accidental mistake and corrects him from within. Again, there's Krishna's active participation in that. We heard when we were going through Bhagavad Gita, Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, one of our great acharyas, Prabhupada dedicated the Bhagavad Gita as it is to him, was saying that, because there's that verse, apichet suduracharo, even if the devotee does something really, really horrible, that he's to be thought of as a sadhu. You're supposed to consider mantavyo, you're supposed to think of him as a sadhu, that's how, and if you don't, actually you're going against Krishna's desire. And the explanation that he gave for that was that when someone takes up the path of this Uttama Bhakti, he becomes so dear to the Lord that and then the same thing, the Lord also corrects him from within. He becomes so dear to the Lord that even Krishna overlooks the weaknesses like that. And so we also should understand that in time, the person will, in a relatively short time, will become purified. So now we're going to go to chapter 6, and it's going to give us details about how to perform sadhana bhakti. So it said that we were supposed to engage our senses, and we were supposed to try to remember the Lord and not forget him, and now there's details about how to do that. And that's going to, in this chapter, it's going to kind of get an overview, and then the different principles will be described in more detail in the future chapters. So it's going to be a lot of what we cover about, a lot of what we're going to cover here in Nectar of Devotion. We're only going to through chapter 19. It's the eastern ocean of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And so the major part of what we're going to do now is going to be looking at these, at the methods and ways of discharging the devotional service. So this is an overview of that. So how to discharge devotional service, the sadhana bhakti. Srila Rupa Goswami states that his elder brother Sanatana Goswami has compiled the Hari Bhakti Vilas for the guidance of the Vaishnavas, and therein has mentioned many rules and regulations to be followed by the Vaishnavas. Some of them are very important and prominent, and Srila Rupa Goswami will now mention these very important items for our benefit. And Prabhupada says, the purport of this statement is that Srila Rupa Goswami proposes to mention only basic principles, not details. So the Hari Bhakti Vilas contains more and more details. Then Prabhupada explains what he means by that. He says, for example, a basic principle is that one has to accept a spiritual master. Exactly how one follows the instructions of his spiritual master is considered a detail. For example, he says, if one is following the instruction of his spiritual master and that instruction is different from the instructions of another spiritual master, this is called detailed information. Braj Bihari Prabhu was saying that one of Prabhupada's servants was in the room while he met subsequently, right after another, with two different sannyasis. And one of the sannyasis, he said that he should not stay in one place more than 3 days, but should travel and preach. And the other one, he told he should go to this one place and stay there. And it was a little confusing for the servant to then ask Prabhupada about it afterwards. That he said, well, they're both sannyasis, both in the same order of life, and he had one do one thing. So this was the same spiritual master giving different instructions. And Prabhupada's answer to him, that why he did that, was this: the spiritual master is not a dead stone. So he doesn't just have to do everything mechanically. He finds what is the most useful for that person. He can give instructions based on what will be beneficial, of course, for Krishna and for that person. He doesn't always give the same instruction in seemingly similar circumstances. He takes into account what would be best for that person and best for Krishna. He's not a dull stone, he says. Not mechanical. So those are details. And so Prabhupada summarizes this: but the basic principle of acceptance of a spiritual master is good everywhere, although the details may be different. Srila Rupa Goswami does not wish to enter into details here, but wants to place before us only the principles. So these are the main things that are given in the Hari Bhakti Vilas. And then there's 64 of these important items. And Prabhupada says, the 64 items of devotional service should include all of our activities of body, mind, and speech. As stated in the beginning, the regulative principles of devotional service enjoins that all of our senses must be employed in the service of the Lord. Exactly how they can be thus employed is described in the above. It's a below in this case. I changed the order of this because I wanted to put it ahead of it. It should be the below 64 items. This came afterwards. And we should remember again that the main principle of sadhana bhakti is to remember Krishna and never forget him. So if we're engaging all of our senses, body, mind, and speech, in the Lord's service, we can be assured that we can at least have a good chance of remembering him during those times. We can sometimes serve on autopilot and forget, but this is meant to do that by channeling all of our activities in various ways, body, mind, and speech. Then it helps us to gain that goal of remembering and never forgetting. And so he breaks it up, Rupa Goswami. He has first he gives 10 items, then he gives another 10 items, and then he gives the rest, another 44, of which 5 are repetitions and the most important ones. So first he lists 10 items. The first 3, which are, Prabhupada says, especially important. And it says, and also in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And Prabhupada says these 10 items, the first ones, are preliminary necessities for beginning the discharge of devotional service in regulative principles. In the beginning, if a neophyte devotee observes the above-mentioned 10 principles, surely he will quickly make good advancement in Krishna consciousness. Okay, so I've put in bold the first 3 to indicate their particular importance. The first one is accepting a spiritual master, taking initiation from a spiritual master is 2, and following the instructions of the spiritual master. So those 3 are especially important there. So you accept one, take initiation, and follow the instructions. Again, it's not just enough to be initiated. You're learning. Then it says you should follow the great acharyas. Prabhupada says also in line with your spiritual master. We just heard a lecture by Srila Prabhupada, who he says that you receive the teachings of the previous acharya through me. So it's not that you go study them so much independently, but that you follow their examples as given by your spiritual master. Or if you do study them, you understand how it applies to your spiritual master's teachings. Inquiring from the spiritual master about how you can perform devotional service and make advancement. And then acting for Krishna's satisfaction, so you give up things, so you're willing to give up things in order to serve, and you're willing to accept things that you wouldn't accept in order to serve. So you may give up things that you want to hold on, or things that you would like to do. You give those things up in order to serve Krishna, and also you may accept things that you would not otherwise accept in order to serve Krishna. That's how Prabhupada explains that one. So acting for Krishna's satisfaction, not for your own. And he puts it that way, that sometimes you may have to do something that you don't want to do, or accept something that you don't want to accept. And other times you may have to give up something that you'd like to have, or give up something that you'd like to do in order to please Krishna. Accepting only the bare necessities for material things. We heard that so much in the Nectar of Instruction. Simplicity there. Fasting for the Ekadashi. And worshipping sacred trees such as the banyan tree. So those are the first 10. And those you'll see are all dues. And then there's 10 more items, which Prabhupada says, without which, he says, one cannot properly elevate himself to the platform of sadhana bhakti or devotional service in practice. What it looks like is that the first ones contain the positive things that you have to do, and the second one can contain things that you have to avoid in order to be able to stay on the path properly. So that's what we're going to get now. The next 10 are mostly don'ts. It says give up the association with non-devotees, so it means don't associate with non-devotees, right? And don't preach to the faithless. We have that also with the holy name, and we take some liberties with that in Krishna's service. But the idea is that that if people don't have too much knowledge, if they're innocent people, they can't make offenses, especially to the holy name, very easily. If they're ignorant, they don't get charged for it. But if we give them information and they have no inclination towards it, and then they can be liable for their offenses. So we don't, and they can offend you, that you're trying to bother them and such things. So you try to at least find the innocent. Right? This is the Madhyama Adhikari, middle level devotee. They make friends with the devotees, serve Krishna, try to help the innocent, and they avoid those who are averse to the Lord, because you'll make them make more offenses to you, because those persons who are really hostile can make offenses to the devotee, not to the holy name, but to the devotees. And so if you try to force devotion onto them, you may actually hurt them more than benefit them. And it says, don't be eager to build costly temples or monasteries, and don't pursue knowledge in order to become a professional speaker. I kind of summarized those two. The idea, there's like a verse in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that says actually 3 different things like that. Not building costly temples or monasteries, not reading so many books, especially of knowledge that's not connected with bhakti, and also not making many disciples or unqualified disciples in particular. And those things, now we see that, and in the temples also are other buildings. Here Prabhupada says temples or monasteries. There in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu it says things that aren't connected with devotional service. What I see here in those things are whether those things being done in Krishna's service or not, even if it's building temples, even if it's gaining scriptural knowledge, because it says reading in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it's talking more about that, building some kind of doing some other projects that aren't related specifically to devotional service, reading books that aren't directly connected with devotion, so you can argue with people and show your learning, and not making disciples that are unqualified. Those things may not be so relevant to us. And so here even Prabhupada says temples or monasteries, which seems to be connected with devotion. But if we act in ways, there's in the status of unsteady devotional service, Anishta Sadhana Bhakti, there's something that's called Taranga Rangani, riding the waves of bhakti. And it says that you want two things from your devotional service. You're interested in puja, worship or respect, and pratishta or position. Prabhupada usually sums these things up. He says it's profit, adoration, and distinction. And so we can even while seemingly doing service, we can want to become somebody important. So the people would be to be respected and to have a position of prominence. Right? And so we may even do things that seem to be related to Krishna by that. I'm seeing that thread in these sorts of things, wanting to have so many disciples. They will worship you, and also you'll show what a great person you are, and building great things. So Prabhupada had, he built great temples, but he did it for Krishna's pleasure. And he made many disciples. And he even mentions later on that maybe not always so qualified, but he did it for Krishna's pleasure, not for his own self-aggrandizement. And he also told us to read all of his books. He wrote many books, but also not just so that we become the greatest knowers of the philosophy, but because it helps our devotion and we can help others with it. So to me, there seems to be a thread of not wanting self-aggrandizement there, the way Prabhupada's presenting it. And don't be negligent in ordinary dealings. That also seems to me, sometimes we think that because we are on this path, we're now practicing devotional service, the highest thing, that we can, that other people are not so important. We may be able, Prabhupada he says, in later chapters he calls it being straightforward in ordinary dealings. Here he says, don't be negligent. Other place, he uses the same thing as says being straightforward. There's something called antinomianism, where you think because you're on this very high path that you can't do any wrong. Normal morality doesn't apply. And so again, this is kind of a self-aggrandizing thing, I think. And then don't be under the spell of lamentation or loss. Lamentation and loss or jubilation and gain. Attachment and aversion. It makes us stray off the path. That this was the problem with Arjuna. He had compassion, which was a good quality, but it was so strong that it was taking him off the path of his devotional service, or off path of his dharma. And so it says we don't want to come under the control of these things. We have to be dhira, tolerant of these things. Don't disrespect the demigods. Sometimes we think the devatas are not really pure devotees, and we worship only Krishna. So we can disrespect them, but they're actually devotees of Krishna and highly respectable persons. Don't give necessary trouble to others. Again, we have respect for others. And they're also dear to Krishna. Don't make offenses either to the holy name or to the deities. And don't tolerate blasphemy of the Lord or devotees. So these things will be like protections on the path. The other things stated what we do. The first 10 were do's, and these are things to avoid that will provide. If we don't avoid these things, there'll be obstacles on our path of devotion. So then Prabhupada says, altogether, Srila Rupa Goswami mentions 20 items of these first 20. And again, I've made a mistake here. I think it says, no, maybe it's okay. And all of them are very important. So these are 20 very important items. Out of 20, the first 3, namely accepting the shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, taking initiation from him, and serving with respect and reverence are the most important. So the first 10 are do's, this is my comment, and the second 10 are don'ts. And in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in the actual verse, it says that those 20 items are the doorway. The dwara, it's a doorway to bhakti. That's how they take it. That's how the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the particular verse states it.
Book is full of verses.
Yeah, yeah. But in this particular one, this was a commentary on that. It said that these 20 items are the doorway to bhakti. So now there's 44 remaining items to make up the 64. 20 are down. And the first 39 of these are new items. The final 5 are repeated items, and because they're considered to be the most important of all the 5 important forms of devotional service, we usually say. So we're just gonna zip through these quickly because we're gonna discuss them in more detail. It says in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that some of these are standalone items, and some of them are kind of categories. So we'll see, we'll see worshiping the deity is something, but then there's many other ways. Then there's some kind of specific things that fall into that category. So some of these are standalone items, and some of them are categories. That's why you see kind of repetition, or like they say you should pray, and then they give different kind of prayers you can say. So those are like the praying is a general heading, and the specific things fall under that category. So you're supposed to mark the body with tilak, and you can also write the Hare Krishna mantra on the body with tilak. Accept prasadam, flowers and garlands, and wear them. So you should dance in front of the deity, for the deity's pleasure, obviously. And bow down to the deity and the guru whenever you come into their presence. It says stand up when visiting a temple. I guess sometimes people are not sure about that one. I think sometimes if they're really respectable people, they're carrying in a palanquin or something, and you have to get up off that palanquin and stand up and show respect when you enter. Stand up and then offer obeisances. And it says if the deity is on procession, you follow that. And he says visit the temple on a daily basis, sometimes more than once. So in Vrindavan, they usually tour various temples. You can circumambulate the temple. It says at least 3 times. And he says worship the deity. So this is more of a general one. Do service for the deity. Sing, perform sankirtan, chant, offer prayers, offer notable prayers, honor Mahaprasadam, drink Charanamrita, smell offered incense and flowers, and touch the deity's feet. So we're just gonna zip through these because these will be discussed again later on. So we're just gonna zip through these and so get an overview of what's coming up. They're gonna talk about this. Rupa Goswami will offer also evidences from the scripture to support these things, and Prabhupada will give commentary also. Seeing the deity with devotion. So you take darshan and you see it with devotion, not just mechanically. Offer arati to the deity. That's, of course, obviously, if you're... some of these can only be done by those who are qualified to go into the altar. Hear about the Lord from revealed scriptures. Pray to the deity for mercy. Remember the deity. Meditate upon the deity. Offer some voluntary service. Think of the Lord as a friend. Offer everything to the Lord. Offer a favorite article. So something you like, you offer to the Lord, right? Now you keep all the good things for yourself and you give what you don't like to Krishna. And Prabhupada says, one should take all kinds of risks and perform all endeavors for Krishna's benefit. Be a surrendered soul, water tulsi, regularly hear Srimad Bhagavatam, live in a sacred place such as Mathura, Vrindavan, and Dwaraka, serve devotees, serve according to your means. So if you have a lot of means, you should serve more than if you're a poor person.
What it means?
According to your how much wealth and stuff you have, and ability you have, So someone may be very poor and can offer something very meager, and that can be very, they can offer something very meager, but it might be a high percentage of what they have. And some otherwise can offer something better, but it won't be in proportion to that. Observe special vows during Kartik. Observe the Janmashtami, have a celebration, it says, for Janmashtami. And then here's the 5. And we should notice that these are very prominent in our temples, and especially they're also in our morning program, basically. Serving the deity with care and devotion. So the deities are prominent in the temples. People are serving them, and we can have darshan with them if we're not doing that particular thing. Relish Bhagavatam reading among devotees, Prabhupada says. That's how he says it in that party. So there's the morning Bhagavatam class in temples. Associate with devotees, and Prabhupada says especially more advanced ones. The devotees that gather in the temples. Chant the holy name and live in Mathura. Prabhupada says that his temples were like outposts from the spiritual world, so embassies. So that qualifies for that. So you see that Prabhupada's regular program in making his temples and setting up his temples were really in line with these 5 principles. He didn't just come up with something, decide to do it such and such a way. He was following Rupa Goswami very carefully here. And And so then Prabhupada sums up at the end. He says, altogether there are 64 items for discharging the regulative practice of devotional service. Out of these 64 items, 5 items, namely worshipping the deity, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, associating among the devotees, Sankirtan, and living in Mathura, are very important. And then he says then he talks about the 64 in general. The 64 items of devotional service should include all our activities of body, mind, and speech. As stated in the beginning, the regulative principle of devotional service enjoins that all our senses must be employed in the service of the Lord. Exactly how they can be thus employed is described in the above 64 items. So it gives us a lot to work with. So if we want to be immersed in devotional service, it gives us that. So in the following chapters, they're gonna look at them again, offer some evidence, sometimes a little bit more explanation about the individual items that were listed, and that's going to happen for the next several chapters. Okay, so let me. That concludes our presentation for the day. That's through chapter 6, 4, 5, and 6.